Welcome back to the channel. I want to talk today about how to use Notion for businesses. There's a lot of resources out there for how to use Notion for individuals and maybe small teams, but for managing Notion with dozens, maybe hundreds, potentially even thousands of people, and yes, those workspaces are out there, I've seen them, it gets a lot harder and a lot trickier, and you really need to know what you're doing, and you need to set up Notion in a specific way that allows for the autonomy and the flexibility that people want when they work, but also the structure that they need so that work can actually get done and other people can actually find the information they're looking for. I'm Josh Red. I'm a Notion certified consultant over at Notion State, and this is a video all about Notion for businesses, and I'm going to share 7 key concepts that you should consider when building your Notion workspace at a company, especially one at scale. This is not comprehensive. This is not everything. There may be some other pieces. People do it in many different ways, but this is how we do it at Notion State, and this is how we've seen it be really successful across multiple clients with hundreds of workers in their workspace. So I think it's proven itself so far, and I'm excited to show you some of those key concepts so that you can get started. I hope you find this video helpful, and if you do, I'd appreciate it if you'd press that like button, help me out a little bit, and if you want to see more videos coming your way, you can subscribe. Of course, leave comments, and I'd love to interact with you down in the comments, or find me over on Twitter at @TheJoshRed, and would love to talk to you there. Otherwise, hope you enjoy this video. This is Notion for Businesses, 7 key concepts. The first thing that we want to do when deploying a workspace in Notion for a company that's at scale, so they have multiple levels to their hierarchy, multiple teams under multiple departments, is actually match your operating model to a Notion database using sub-items. So that looks like a database that we call domains with the highest level page called company, and then it breaks down into the departments. And so these are departments in this, fictional company, and then those departments break down further into teams. And so if you even had further sub-teams, you could break those down and include them as sub-items. What you want to do is just recreate that hierarchy of your company in one database. We like to call it domains. And then this is actually going to be the key for all of the filters and all of the structuring throughout the workspace so that things show up where they're supposed to. So if you have things that are only related to engineering, then they'll be tagged with engineering, and that'll actually happen most of the times automatically. And then if you have something that's related to the larger department called product, then it'll be tagged with product. What's really cool about building in Notion well is that the things that are at the smallest level, the kind of grassroots level, get rolled up into anything higher. So we can set up filters to show any information coming from all of the lowest levels and aggregating it at this higher level so that leadership can see things at a higher level, but the people who actually execute the work don't have to worry about all of the other things that are going on in different teams. They can just focus on their work. So we have our operating model database, the domain database, matched and related to a people database. And this is just for people at the company. And of course, you can create another contacts database for a CRM or include it in this one. But what we've done here is actually recreated the org chart as well on the people side. So you've got the CEO and direct reports all the way down to the different teams. Of course, this is just fictitious, but you can build this out and build a hierarchy for your company and then relate them to their proper domains. What's the highest level that they have ownership of, and relate them to those. So this domain database is going to be the foundation for every other piece of the workspace, and any other global database should be related to this domain database. And when I say global database, what I mean is any database that is accessible cross-functionally. So if more than one team needs to access that data, basically if it needs to live in a spot where both teams can access that data, we consider it global. Those go in their own place. We'll talk about that in a second, but pretty much all of those and some others that are just more team specific should be related to this domains database. And we'll use that to set up all the filters and HQs and views of the data so that you can see data contextually. So for example, we have an objectives database, a company objectives, and that even further breaks down into sub-objectives. But to showcase how this relates to different domains, these are the company level objectives. And so this is all of the objectives, they're related to domain, And then if we kind of break these open, we can see that they break down into department-specific objectives. So if we actually go to the product HQ, we're no longer going to see this larger one, this achieve 50 million ARR. We're going to see just the product ones. And so if we go over to product HQ, we see these objectives that are filtered just by product. So we're not seeing anything irrelevant. We're not seeing the company level objectives, and we're not seeing any other department objectives. But then again, we can come back up to Dominion HQ, which is just kind of a template, and we're able to see all of the highest level objectives and how they break down further. The second key component is strategically creating your team spaces, and you can actually match your team space structure basically to any of the highest levels that you used when you created the domain database. So in this case, what the team space sidebar looks like is one team space per, we got one for the company, but then one per department, and then a main HQ page for each. So we've got the company, this is just a dummy page, but we've got the main company team space and then one HQ under each. And then this HQ is where we'll house all of the linked databases and build out the entire infrastructure for your workspace. And then what's really cool is that we use that domains database to filter according to whatever HQ we're looking at. So you can see on the sidebar, I've got design, product, finances, people ops, sales and marketing. I've got all these kind of common team spaces just to showcase this is what you want to set up usually. And then that gives each of your departments and then each of their teams and sub-teams their own space to work in, but also access to quickly go and see other information from other departments or teams if they need to. And what's really cool is this also is the place where your leadership will see all of the information they want to see on the HQ, but then there's more space for you to go and work and execute your work in a more granular fashion without getting into the weeds for the people that don't want to get there. So I'm jumping back and forth between different workspaces because these are all templates or showcases, but you've got different HQs for each of your different departments. And so over here, we've got these domains, we've got a product HQ, and then we've got sales and marketing HQ, people HQ. These HQs are where information is seen, usually by leadership or by somebody from outside of this team or department. So somebody can come in here and just kind of get a quick glance of all of the big picture things, goals going on or projects, but where the people of this team actually do their work is in the OS. And so each of these different departments has a pair of HQs and OSs. So every single one has an HQ and every single one has an OS. We've got people HQ over here, which is what we're looking at for leadership and people outside the team. Not really where work gets done, but it's where information gets visualized. And then we've got the people OS, and this is where the team can jump in and actually do their work, see things more specific to them, and get really in the weeds. And this is using the perspectives method. If you are unfamiliar with perspectives method and how this works, I've got another video you can go and watch and see how this works. It works amazing for teams, and in fact, we deploy it for every workspace and people love it. It creates a structure for all of the workspace while still allowing for that flexibility and customization across different people and teams. They can each have their own list of perspectives, but when you go somewhere else, when you go to a different team's space, it's really familiar. The structure feels really familiar and navigation is a breeze. It's all set up so that you don't even have to open your sidebar 95% of the time. So perspectives, go ahead and check out my previous video on that if you are interested in how that goes together. Every team needs a place to see their information, but each person, when you get down to the individual level, probably has an even more granular level of task management that they want to work on. So we actually implement this thing called MeOS, which is an individual's perspective method pack. So we've got my projects and my tasks and my meetings, all these things, but we don't have to create one of these for every single person. We actually use a really powerful feature called the Me filter. And so any of these databases that we've brought into here, so for example, my projects, we have it filtered so that the owner of this project is me. So me does not mean Josh Red, it means whoever is looking at this page. So if Brian comes and looks at this page, this will look completely different. And if I look at this page, it's going to look different than what Brian is looking at. So that makes this MeOS incredibly scalable. It doesn't matter if you have 5 people or 5,000, they can all look at this, and this is useful for them. And we have a standardized structure, so projects, tasks, meetings, but we can flex this. And if you have another data object that you want everybody to be able to interact with, you can include another perspective. And then one step further is that you can still, in fact, give people their own, what we would call a personal OS. So we got the MeOS, which is scalable, and then we've got the personal OS, which allows somebody to have their own complete custom perspectives pack. And you can imagine somebody wanting to create their own perspectives, change the views around, and even work in their own private data. This makes it really intuitive to navigate and use, almost like an application within Notion. And you don't have to jump over to the sidebar, go to the private section, jump into your data and back and forth. What you can do in a personal OS, I would not recommend it in the MeOS, but in the personal OS, let's actually go to that. When building a personal OS, rather than using this MeOS that everybody has access to, which you should not let people change that because they're going to change it for everybody else, you can give everybody access to their own personal OS. The great thing about Perspectives method is it does nothing to the actual data. And so you can create as many of these as you want. You can delete them all, and you're not actually deleting any of your company data. These are just purely for creating a nice intuitive viewing of data and making it really custom to each person. So it does take a little bit of work. And so, when you got hundreds of people, it's probably easier to provide resources on how to create them themselves, and they'll learn Notion along the way. So that would just look like recreating this PackOS. Again, watch the Perspectives video if this is interesting to you, and then creating their own personal one so that when they are dealing with this OS, they're not actually changing anything for anybody else. They can include as many perspectives as they want. They can shape it as much as makes sense for them. And then if they really want to, they can actually, if you want to bring in your own personal data, you can do that. Let's pretend that this is a personal OS, and we add a page, and we call it Secret Diary. And this is a table. Okay, so these are our entries. And over here on the sidebar, you can see that this is actually private. So that means that nobody else can see this. Even if I put it into a Perspectives pack that everyone else has access to, they will not be able to see this data. So if I copy the link to this and go backwards, and we create a new perspective called private data, maybe be a little bit more inconspicuous if you're actually doing this, but if this was your own personal OS, you can drop that linked database in here, and you'll be able to see this. And everybody else who comes to this page or this Perspectives pack, which it's not a big deal if they can, because usually they're just going to see all of the data that's already available to them. So it's actually really helpful for them to check in on you and see, what you're working on, and maybe they're looking for a file that you wrote. Instead of asking you for it, they can just jump over here. So really useful. But when they come to this private data page, they will not be able to see this database. You will be able to, but they will not, because this database lives in the private section of your Notion sidebar. If you were to share it with somebody or put it in a more public place, then sure, that's like leaving your diary out on the sidewalk. Someone's going to pick it up and read it. But you are able to effectively kind of balance your work and personal things, or at least your more accessible information versus your private information. Maybe you've got some more leadership or executive type notes in here. What's really cool is that for every person, they can just go to one place. They have their own personal OS. They can manage their projects and their tasks, come down and even manage their own personal stuff without having to leave. So the personal OS is an amazing tool to implement in your workspace. And you don't even have to do anything else in this video. The Perspectives method can really level up your workspace, especially at a company. And so again, watch that video. And if you have any further questions, of course, you can ask in the comments, and I'll be sure to answer them. Another key concept that you want to consider in your workspace is keeping your data separate from your dashboards. Individuals can kind of throw their data around everywhere. They don't really care because nobody else is going to see it. But especially at scale, and especially when you've got multiple departments and teams and all that, you want to keep your data in a spot that you know where to find it at minimum, but you can also manage permissions and all those things, because permissions in databases, frankly, is not great. Each database, if you want to set it to the setting that is recommended, which is can edit content, you have to do that individually. You can't actually just set it in their master page and then they all change. You have to go into each database and change it to can edit content, or just give everybody can edit access, which lets them change the entire database, create and destroy properties. That's usually not what people want. And so all of that is a good reason why you should house all of your data in its own spot. And in fact, at scale, it's really helpful to put them in their own Teamspace. So we've got this Teamspace called CompanyOS. This is actually how Notion officially, when they do some of their showcases to potential clients for companies that are kind of mid-market and above, they actually have the Teamspace dedicated to data called CompanyOS. So we like to house a lot of the global data in this CompanyOS. What's really important is that you just keep it in one spot. And by keeping it out of the main Teamspaces, this actually creates the wall, or at least the gate, between internal employees and external contractors. If your Teamspace is set to default, that means that every member of the workspace has to have access to it, even if you bring in outside contractors as members of the workspace. This does not include guests, but members. And there are plenty of cases where a lot of clients of ours will have external contractors as members of their workspace. And so this is not uncommon at all. So what's really nice is for you to keep your data separate, kind of in its own back room, but that doesn't mean that people won't have access to it. It just gives you more control over it, and a lot of security in that sense, some confidence that you know that your data is safe. So we've got this CompanyOS Teamspace, and then this is where we house all of the global data. And this might look a lot different depending on your company's use case, but these are kind of some of the common databases that you might find. What is important is that you keep them here, and that way when you are sharing them, you give people the right access instead of just giving them by default more access than you intended to. This is also really helpful for just getting people used to data being really important to the idea of a global database. It's only global if you only use that one database. And so, for example, we've got a projects database right here, and it's really important that we only use this one projects database for the entire majority of all projects in the workspace, save for some very special examples where it's really important for people to not have access to those. But by and large, these global databases should be open and available, and nobody should be creating their own versions of this database, because then it ruins this networking effect that you can achieve in Notion. You have to let people have access to the database where everything is housed, and that's what's going to allow this kind of networked feel of the workspace. That's what's going to allow us to use that domain database and connect everything in a way that's seamless and scalable. Because if every department or every team has their own project database, then you're not able to aggregate those at a higher level up the hierarchy. You're not going to let leadership see it. People are going to be confused. There's going to be duplicative data. So again, can't stress this enough. Go with global data as much as possible, and then housing it in its own place gets people used to this idea to value a centralized place of knowledge and build up your enterprise knowledge. So a great practice for many reasons, for security, but also for knowledge management and creating a culture that values what Notion does best, which is creating a network of knowledge. One really critical key concept for Notion workspaces is managing permissions. And I will not lie to you, this is a complex, intimidating area of Notion to get into. And it took me a long time to really get a grasp of how permissions work, but at scale, it's just necessary. You have to be able to do permissions well, unless you just want to give everybody full access. But it's not even about letting everybody see stuff. It's about who has the ability to change stuff. And so if you give everybody full access, they're just going to break things. As much as you value your people and think they're smart, it's not that they're not smart. It's just that a lot of times some people just don't know what they're doing and they accidentally delete things without intending to. So unless you have an entire workspace of professional Notion pro users, this is just going to happen. So manage your permissions well. A really great place to start is by using member groups instead of individually adding people to different pages and databases. Use groups as much as you can, and it will save you a lot of, frankly, stress and time. So a really good practice is to create, first of all, an all employees group. So you can see an all employees group right here. And any employee that you onboard, add them to this group. And then when you want to give people access, basically all your employees access to different areas like your global data, you just give this group access instead of, in this case, 244 members. I don't want to give 244 people access. I want to give one group access. And by using this all employees group, what this does is it creates that gate between employees and between outside contractors. So if you are bringing in an outside contractor, they obviously won't get added to this group. And by default, if you have your permissions set up right, they're not going to have access to those databases, for example, where only employees have access to it. You can give them access by individually still adding them to it, but that's at your discretion. And so you're able to control your data a lot better. So all employees is a great group to use, and it gets you out of the bad habit of adding individuals to pages, which nobody wants to do. But then the other practice that you want to do is for every team space that you created, which you created the team spaces based on the highest level underneath that company in the domains database. So for every team space, you want to have a member and an owner group. So a member for people and an owner for people, a marketing member, marketing owner, and so on and so forth for every single one of those team spaces that you created. So if you have departments, you'll probably have, 2 for each department that you have. And what we want to do is match these with the team space permissions that we give people in the team space. So rather than adding individuals to the team space permissions, we want to add this group to the team space permissions. So without doxing a bunch of client workspaces, I'm going to show you a brand new team space in our workspace. Let's call it just test team space. So over in this test team space, when I open up the team space settings, let's say I wanted to add, a group of people, maybe our, customer support team to this team space. So rather than adding people individually, let's add the group. So let's go over to settings and members, and then under members, toggle over here to groups, and then let's create a group. Let's call it test group. And what I'll do is I'll add members to this. So me, Brian, Notion State, Ava, test group. There are now 4 members of this test group. And when I go back to that team space settings menu, okay, so instead of adding me, Brian, hello at Notion State, Ava to this as team space members, I will just do test group right here, invite. Now there are automatically 4 members. There could be 400 people in here, it doesn't matter. They will all have access to this team space member permission level, which up here we can see has full access. Now, if I have an individual contractor that's not part of this test group, or I have an outside person, I can still give them individual access. And the key permission rule that you need to know is that most access wins. So if one person has multiple kind of places of entry into a page based on different accesses that they've been given, whatever gives them the most access, that's the access they're gonna have. So if one kind of channel, maybe your member here, gives them can comment access, then they also have another group that's been added to this page, and that gives them full access. They'll have full access because most access wins. So always remember that and use groups. So the key here is that you create a group for members for each team space and just add them to that member group. So when you're onboarding somebody, you can just kind of onboard them to the groups menu rather than having to go to all these different team spaces and make sure that they have access. You just add them to the groups that have already been established and have already been given access to the correct areas. It's almost like a middleman that you can add, and it's much easier to onboard somebody from this menu rather than going to each place they need to be given access. So at scale, much better and much smoother. And then the owners, if you're savvy in Notion, you might wonder why I'm creating an owners group, because in Teamspaces, you're not able to give groups team space owner access. You can't do that. If you have enterprise, you can give them custom permissions. That's a different subject, but you're not able to give a group ownership access. And even beyond full access, owners have a little bit more access than anybody, even those that have full access. So the reason why I suggest making an owner group is because when you house all of your data in one place over here, this is where you want to give the owners the full access to the database, and you want to give the members the can edit content access to the database. So without getting super into the weeds, because this could just turn into something really confusing, we want to give owners of the Teamspace, let's say they're the product owner, we want to give them more access to their particular databases. And so that's why we create that owner group, is that the owners of product can have that extra level of full access. It lets them change the structure of the database, but anybody else, we want to just give them member access, and that's usually can edit content on the databases, and then in their actual Teamspaces, probably maybe even limiting them so that they can't change a lot of the structure of the workspace until they've been given further access. So there's a lot to this. I'm not assuming that you just figured out permissions in this little snippet of a video, but a good practice is that you, one, have the all company group and put all your employees in there. And then you create an owner and a member group for each of your Teamspaces that you created, which are most likely married one-to-one with your departments. And you'll have those in your domain database that you built from the beginning of this video. Another thing we should touch on is the plan that you use. And so it's just really important, one, financially, but also two, just with the features that you need to choose the right plan. So if we look at the plans in Notion, you can see just a list of all of the different plans and the things that they include. This might look like a intimidating list, but especially for a company with a bunch of people, every new person is going to be another expense. And as you climb up the tiers, it can be a significant increase in the cost. And so you should pay for the features that you need, but it's also just, good stewardship to only use the plan that you really need. So definitely check out this list, but some of the key things that you want to probably consider are things like the guest collaborators. And so you have a limit. So if you, for some reason, are using a ton of guests, you might need to consider that. Also, Teamspaces. If you need a private Teamspace, then you're gonna want to upgrade past plus into business. And that just means that you can create a Teamspace and nobody can even see it exists. You can create closed Teamspaces, but people will still be able to see the name and the names of the pages that are within it. They can't see any of the content, but they can see some of the names. If you need to keep it completely private, let's say you're planning a secret company offsite in Hawaii and you want to keep it private from the rest of your company, you would create a private Teamspace so that nobody can even see the title, company offsite in Hawaii, keep it secret, right? So that's what private Teamspaces are for, and you'll want business or higher. And then advanced Teamspace permissions. These are actually really powerful, but of course it requires the highest level of plan. But this, in a sense, lets you assign any groups or people to any level of permissions within a Teamspace. If you don't have enterprise, you can only do it by connecting a person or a group to either Teamspace member or Teamspace owner. That's not a whole lot of nuance if you need it. So if you need something a lot more nuanced, you're gonna want enterprise for those advanced Teamspace permissions. And of course, there's a lot of other things to consider, maybe single sign-on or user provisioning. If that's important to you, then you're gonna need either business or enterprise for those. Definitely take a look. There's audit log. If you need to have a record of everything that happens in your workspace, every event that somebody does, which some companies do need for security and compliance, you're gonna need the enterprise workspace plan so that you can have access to this audit log. But this audit log is also helpful for finding out who did something in case something gets lost or deleted, or hopefully, fingers crossed, it's not for some other nefarious reasons, but this is the world and some people are up to no good. So that audit log will give you a lot more access into finding what happened to different data in your workspace. So a lot more there. I'm not going to cover it all, but you can take a look at Notion's official website, and you can just come into here into settings and members and come down to plans, and you can see all plans and compare all of these different features. If you have questions on what a feature is or if you need it, you can definitely ask in the comments and we'll get you going on what you might actually need or don't need. The next component that's really key for a workspace at scale, and we've already kind of seen it and talked about it, but it's a standardized UI and UX. And so what's really important is that you do allow for flexibility and autonomy, but let people do that with the data and the things that they're creating. But the structure of the workspace, as much as it's reasonable, you should have a kind of a templatized vision for what your workspace should look like. And that builds on top of some of the fundamental pieces we've already talked about. So building out the Teamspaces and having the HQs and OSs, those already are creating this familiar structure for people to get used to so that they know what they're looking at. If every team and every department builds their own space in their own way, even if they used global data correctly, if they build it with a different structure, you're going to get confused whenever you go to their spot, and it's going to be basically like learning new software and finding files in the right place on somebody else's computer. It's just a nightmare to try and find the things that you need. What's really nice for a company at scale is at least having some sort of structure already in place that makes sense, that people are familiar with, but they still have the freedom to flex it for what they need and create the assets that they need to do their work. So we've already seen this already, but we've got the HQs. Every HQ for the company and the different departments, it all looks the same. It's all structured the same, but what's really important is that the data that shows up is only filtered for that team. So you still have a lot of flexibility here. And then even further, I think, is the OSs. And this is where you're able to create a familiar structure, but then each team or department, whoever is using this OS, even an individual, they can create their own perspectives, but everybody should have already been used to this layout and they know how to navigate between these different perspectives, and they can find what they're looking for really easily because they're familiar with it. It's like learning a brand new app. So try to reduce the amount of system navigation that people have to do to find the information. That's really, I think, one of the core benefits of Notion is that you're reducing and sometimes eliminating the time and stress that it takes to find information. We want to make sure that we use Notion to the best of its ability in that case. And so we have these different structures up and down that hierarchy. So we've got this for the company, we've got it for the departments, even the different teams, if that's applicable, and then all the way down to the individual. And we're not introducing a new structure at every level. People are already familiar with it. It just focuses in and contextualizes the data that's within it. So makes it very intuitive to navigate, but also find the information that you're looking for so that you can spend your time actually doing the work that you want to do, not finding the information to actually get it done. All right, and then finally, what's really helpful is that when you are working with a bunch of people in Notion, you've got so many people that have different levels of knowledge in Notion, and they probably see the value in using Notion, but they don't have the resources available to learn it, not only as a software, but how you've set it up as a company, because every company has their different needs and they set it up differently because they operate differently. And so as we're matching Notion workspaces to operating models, every Notion space is going to be different. And that's why people use Notion, because they can build the software that they need for their process and not the other way around. So what's really helpful is to create and use and continually update what we call a Notion field guide. This field guide is just learning resources for Notion specifically. When you bring people on, if you're hopefully a good company that empowers new employees to learn what they need to do, you have an onboarding process. And part of that onboarding process is just all the things like keys to the building or remote work policy, things like that. What the Notion Field Guide does is it acts as an onboarding resource for people, and in fact, an ongoing learning resource for people to learn Notion, how it works, and how your company is using it specifically. And especially if you use HQs and OSs and things like that, or you want to give people the resource to build their own personal OS, this is where you would house it. So it's one place where if somebody has a question about Notion, they should be able to come and find what they're looking for. So we call it the Notion Field Guide, and some of the key pages that we have are a welcome page, which just kind of outlines the main sections and kind of gives a quick description of what you can expect when you go to these different pages on the side. And then a quick start, which should take 5 to 10 minutes max to kind of get started. So if somebody can just jump in, not have to, sit down and study, they can just kind of get a real quick glance at how to get started. And then we point them to an onboarding page. This onboarding page is kind of cool because it's just a quick dynamic list of some onboarding tasks. So we have these learning resources, so all these videos on using your team OS, welcome to your HQ, and things like that. We have these dynamically kind of built in already. They are all templated and they're all kind of built into this button. So this button is really cool because it creates it based on the person who clicked the button. So these tasks are assigned to the person who clicks this button. So you can see that I've already clicked this and I have all of these tasks assigned to me, and I can kind of go through them. And once I've watched these videos, just by opening this up, I can check it done and go through an onboarding checklist. So this is a great way to just get somebody started on learning Notion and some of the specific resources that you've provided for them in this Notion workspace. A great use of the Notion field guide. And what's really cool is that it is just dynamic based on whoever clicked this button. And this view right here is dynamic based on who's looking at it. So essentially, the person who clicks this button is going to create these onboarding tasks just for them. And this view will only show the onboarding tasks that were created just for them. So you've kind of got your own personal little onboarding dashboard right here, which is a great addition to the Notion field guide. And then we've got just different variations of learning resources. We're gonna build out some really advanced resources here, but people can essentially level up from level 1 to level 2 to level 3. And then if they have an issue or a question, maybe they wanna build something in the workspace and they don't have access to do it, which probably a good reason why they don't have access to do it, they can submit tickets here, or you can use this for any bugs or problems here. You can submit it and the team will be able to see these tickets. Basically, we created a ticketing system, and then some FAQs, and then news and updates that Notion is putting out, or news and updates based on the company at large. And then this is just where we house the data, all of the learning resources. So that's a field guide, and would highly recommend that you implement a field guide, and you can totally steal some of these ideas. I especially love this onboarding page, but use it as much as you would like. It's just a really good idea to create a field guide specific team space so that people can always have a place to go. And then if they don't find the resource, you'll know what to create to give them that resource, and you know where to put it. All right, that wraps up Notion for Businesses, 7 key concepts that we use at Notion State for deploying workspaces for companies at scale. And again, there's so much more that we could cover, but I wanted to get you started with some of those key things that we deploy when we actually work with clients in building out their Notion workspace. Hope you found it helpful. If you did, would appreciate you pressing that like button and subscribe, of course, if you want to see more videos coming your way. And as always, until then, we'll see you in the next video.